then white can trade queens and take on c5, and which also happens to protect the pawn on e4, and it would just be winning. Bishop b6 is probably also a little bit cooperative, just giving up the bishop right away. So the move that is played here, and this has been played in other games, is queen e8. Okay, so the point of this is if if he takes on c5, then you do queen takes e5, and you're already getting the pawn back because the knight has to retreat, let's say, to d3, and then queen e4, and black has even material in an active position. He probably even has a slight edge. So only now does the knight go to d3, and now he can't really allow this. I think that there was a game where, maybe even a couple games, a game like Caruana-Rajabov, there was a game of Kachan from Los Angeles, where black just took on e4, but then if you get this kind of position, it's even material, opposite bishops, so it sounds okay, but of course we look at these like awful pawns for black, and maybe black can draw, but this is pretty miserable time, I think, getting this position. So instead, bishop to g4. This is a little more clever, and this was played a couple times by, I think, a Dutch grandmaster. I don't even know how to say his name. It's like Prugessers, something like that. And this is a typical move, like white can't play f3, so he has to move his queen. Queen e1, bishop d4, c3. Bishop d4 provokes c3, which just slightly weakens the light squares. That's kind of the point. Bishop b6, knight b6, ab. And this has occurred in a couple games already that continued f3, bishop e6, legitimately threatening to take on a2, and then after like a3, bishop c4, maybe queen to d1, looks like probably the best place to go. And here there's been a few games where black can play queen f7 or queen g6, and then maybe play like c5 with this kind of like funny pawn formation. And white's up like kind of a solid pawn, but black is still like pretty active, and white probably just has a really small edge. And I think in practice black has done okay. I actually looked at this like long ago and thought that's, it was playable for black, maybe some small edge, but not anything that's going to refute the opening. But Shankland has a different idea. It's kind of interesting. He plays c4 right away. So this is an interesting idea. He doesn't want to get like the queenside pawns locked down on the, giving black light square control. So he saves the move f3. That said, I don't really think that this is any kind of refutation of the idea. Now, okay, if he plays too slowly, then white will play like f3 and then b3, bishop b2, and white will be up a pretty good pawn because black won't have the same counterplay. But there's a couple ideas that he could do here. Like he could play like queen e6. Notice he can't take this pawn because f3 will be a 4. But maybe like queen e6. And then if b3, I think there's some tricks here. Like, let's say you do queen e4 now, queen e4, knight e4, f3, and then this move knight c3. So if he takes on g4, you have knight e2 check. And if bishop b2, bishop f5. It's a counterattack. And okay, so where should this knight go? I have a feeling that Shankland, even, I imagine he prepared this. And I looked at this once to the computer and it said equal, but okay, you have some weird positions, like let's say knight c1. Otherwise the knight will come here and here, so let's say knight c1, and now the only square is b1. And I don't know, maybe it's okay, but it wouldn't surprise me if Shankland had looked at this position and had some idea. It doesn't really look like a very smart place for the knight. Even if it goes to a3, there's nowhere to go from there, or even if it gets to d2, there's nowhere to go from there. So a computer will say it's maybe okay, but it's kind of hard to believe. Another idea is actually what he did in the game, which is maybe a better try. He played bishop e6, b3, and then b5. So he's trying to disrupt white before he, just kind of consolidates. So now if he takes here, he can do bishop b3, and he's getting his pawn, and this is not so clear. It looks actually like it's probably fine for black. So it's c4 was a novelty, but this was a pretty good reaction, I think. And then Shankland also had like a good reaction. He played e5, so he's trying to mess up the pawn structure. If he does de, then just like knight e5, bc, knight c4, it's probably somewhat better for white. If like bishop c4, he can take, or maybe he can trade first, but let's say bc. And it's even material, but in some ways this pawn is like extra pawn because of the doubled c pawns. Maybe black is holding here, but it's not very pleasant. So it wouldn't surprise me if this was also part of the preparation. So e5 is kind of a good move. And okay, if he does bc, that's also a possibility. Then I think you just do ef, takes, and take on g7. And it looks kind of risky, but maybe it's playable. Like, you don't even have to take, maybe like rook f5 or rook f7, because you still have this pawn. So it's kind of messy, but, the king side is scary. Maybe just like queen e3 and bishop b2. Probably easier to play for white. So he did bishop f5, so this is also quite logical. And now if ef, then bishop d3, and even though this gets kind of wrecked over here, the queens will get traded because this rook is hanging, so white really has to trade and then play rook d1. And this, must be okay for black. I mean, he could take on g7, he could take here, and then you get some kind of weird position, like if here, both sides have problems. So kind of an odd position, but I don't think black is complaining here. So he played knight b4, which is looks kind of like a better try. And then after de, he played queen e3. So he's trying to kind of lock down on the dark squares. He could perhaps just like trade and maybe play bishop b2 or bishop e3. And because you control this square and a little better pawn structure, this is isolated. Maybe like some kind of small edge, like c6, bishop c5, rook f7, and like a4, and like takes. Maybe rook takes here, or something like this. I think white still has some initiative. Even he can march, maybe even play like queen here or queen here. And at some point, I think white has the initiative because his a pawn is dangerous and black's c pawn is not very good. So that might have been a better try. He played queen e3, which looks kind of sensible too, but I prefer to take on b5. Now bc, bc, queen e6. Not the only move, but it looks pretty sensible. He could play maybe queen f7, he could play bishop e6, but this looks fine. Bishop to b2, and this is, I think, a good try, like kind of offering this pawn. There's just not really such a convenient way to protect it, but it's also maybe not so important. Like if you play something like queen c3, then knight e4, and the queen is, getting kicked around quite a bit. So I like this move, and probably black shouldn't take it. Like maybe he should play like rook b8 or something. And then if a3, even like c5. I think this is like computer suggestion, and a queen takes, knight d7, queen takes, and rook fc8. And this seems like it's pretty good counterplay. Okay, the queen can go to like, has to go to like a7 or a5.